Hey guys, SliceablePaper here, and we're going to be taking a look at the final group of cards from the Knights of the Frozen Throne card set. We have one final Death Knight hero to look at, another legendary to look at, and a few other cards. So we're going to jump right into it with Grave Shambler. Whenever your weapon is destroyed, gain +1/+1. In Constructed, I think this is going to be a very good way for you to get a little extra value out of your weapon. If the opponents start running ooze, if we start seeing the meta being more weapon heavy and people start running weapon removal, this is going to be a good way for you to get value out of that. Based off of stats alone, I really don't think this is a good constructed card. You really need to get at least one buff from a weapon out of this for it to be any good. But once you get that buff, I think this card is going to be excellent. Gets a little bit of elemental synergy, so we may actually see this being run in like an elemental shaman. They like to run a couple of weapons in there, at least 2 copies of, for the life of me I can't remember it, but that weapon that brings Jades onto the board, they like to run a couple copies of that, just as quick removal. So I think in elemental shaman we'll see this fit in there. This card is potentially insane in Rogue Arena, where rogues kind of tend to swap out their weapon if they've got 2 mana left at the end of their turn, just for them to get an extra swing out of their weapons. So in Arena, especially with rogues, this basically should just read Inspire, gain +1/+1 for rogues. It's an okay pick for any other weapon classes, but Rogue, I think, is where we're going to see this run the most, and I think we'll see quite a few of these when you're playing against rogues, or even as a rogue, you'll probably draft at least 1 copy of this card. Grim Necromancer. 4 mana 2/4, summons 2 1/1 skeletons. So this is 4/6 in stats, spread across 3 minions. It's okay, and basically you're trying to build a board with this card, but since the cards individually are too weak in and of themselves, I don't think this is a very good constructed card. It's not like super OP and not real synergistic unless like it's like a token type deck. So I don't think this card is going to be used in constructed. In Arena, it's a fair card. It's really solid, got really solid stats. The opponent has to deal with 3 bodies, and the fact that they are 1 damage each is very welcome. Pings are always needed in Arena, and I think many decks will be running this card. Alright, next we have Hildnir Frostrider. 3 mana 4/4, so really good stats for a 3-drop. Battlecry, freeze your other minions. I don't see any reason why people would want to play this in Constructed unless it's like some kind of weird version of Freeze Shaman where they're running Murabi that gives you that copy of a card that's frozen. You kind of play that on a big board and then play Murabi and Hildnir Frostrider on the same turn, and then you suddenly get a big hand full of those minions again. I really don't think this card is going to be played just because it's that freeze effect, and it's such a big downside for your own board. In Arena, this is a really good card. It's very good stats for a 3-drop. You'll want to play this in Arena. At best, at best you want to play this on like an empty board, or if you're Shaman, like when you've only got totems on the board, where totems can't attack anyway, so there's really no reason for you to worry about freezing them. Even if you only freeze 1 other minion, I think this is a very good drop. You plop this down on turn 3, have a super high tempo play, forcing your opponent to have to deal with a big minion on turn 3. Keening Banshee. Whenever you play a card, remove the top 3 cards of your deck. 4 mana 5/5, really good stats for a 4-drop. This compares very well with the old card Fell Reaver. Fell Reaver was pretty bad unless you were constantly going face with it. Basically because your opponent had a way to burn your deck. When you played this card, your opponent would play a lot of cheap stuff, a lot of 1s and 2 drops, trying to force you to basically discard your entire deck. And most of the time, you would have trouble beating your opponent down before you went into fatigue. Now, Keening Banshee, the benefit I can see to running this card is you can plan when you discard your cards. The opponent does not dictate when you discard your cards, so you can better use this card, make better trades with it, better choose when you want to remove cards from your deck. In Constructed, you may see this used in like a super aggro deck that really doesn't care about discarding cards, and they kind of want to you kind of want to beat your opponent down before you run out of cards in your deck. A thing I want to note about this card is it says remove. It does not say draw, so anything that triggers on a draw effect, like Daring Reporter, is not going to trigger its effect. I think we may see this in Constructed again with some aggro decks, but I think there's too much of a downside to it, and we're not going to see as much of it as we might think. This is going to see a lot of play in Arena, though. The stats are too good to pass up with such a minimal drawback. In Arena, you really don't care so much about discarding cards versus Constructed, mainly because in Arena games do not hardly ever go into fatigue. So you're going to see this run. You're going to see quite a few of these in Arena, and you're going to be picking this card. I think it's an excellent Arena card. Night Howler. Whenever this minion takes damage, gain +2 attack. It fits in Self-Harming Warrior, that kind of archetype that they've been pushing this expansion. In all reality, you're really only going to get 1 or 2 trades out of this card, so at best you'll have like a 5-3 or like, a 7-2 at best. And I think that's just too weak for that to get any effect and any good use out of it. I want to compare this to a card we got in a previous expansion, Aberrant Berserker. Aberrant Berserker is a 4-mana 3/5 with Enrage with Enrage +2 attack. Kind of similar to the way Night Howler works, but Aberrant Berserker is actually better in my opinion. At best, it was really a 4-mana 5/4 versus a 4-mana 5/3, which is better stats, basically just better stats. And in reality, you really only ever got like 2 trades out of Aberrant Berserker, and you're really only ever going to get 2 trades out of Night Howler. I think in Arena, this card may be played, maybe not. You might get better picks than this, you might not. It just depends on the draft and what choices you've been given. If you have a choice between Night Howler and Aberrant Berserker, you'll always pick Aberrant just because it's got better stats. Alright, now we go to our final Death Knight hero, Scourge Lord Garrosh. It's the Warrior Death Knight hero. Battle Cry, equip a 4/3 Shadowmourne that also damages adjacent minions. Shadowmourne is an 8-mana weapon. It damages minions next to whomever your hero attacks. It kind of forces your opponent to kind of redistribute their cards or consider like card placement. Kind of placing taunts on like the side of the board where it can only hit like 2 minions max. So I think this is a really good card. Got decent, durability, decent stats for the cost, and got an insane ability. Helps Warrior keep the board clear. So what's the hero power? The hero power is a 2-mana Whirlwind. Bladestorm, deal 1 damage to all minions. This hero is probably going to be used in more of a control type warrior, and the problem I have with this hero power is it doesn't really fit in a control type warrior. It fits in more of a mid-rangey kind of a self-harming warrior, and by turn 8 you've either won the game or lost it. So I really don't think this is a good fit in control warrior, mainly because control warriors basically just wanted to armor up and out-survive or outlast their opponent. And this card does not facilitate that at all, especially if you're taking face damage when you're swinging with your Shadowmourne. Is this card very good? Based off of the weapon and the armor battle cry, I think it's okay. But with that hero power, I really don't see any benefit to using this card in Constructed. In Arena, this card is really good. You get really good weapon removal with this card. You get little extra survivability off that armor, and you get a ping. And pings, like I said before, like I've said constantly, pings are always really good to have in Arena. It's always good to have just a little extra bit of damage you can deal to enemy minions, because you're not going to be getting like super really good trades. You might like trade into a minion and only have like 1 or 2 health left on the enemy minion to get rid of, and this Blade Storm really helps facilitate that extra bit of damage you can get. Skelemancer. If it's your opponent's turn, summon an 8/8 skeleton. Potentially ridiculous card. You get 10 stat or 10/10 for 5 mana. The only downside is it triggers on your opponent's turn, not your own. So you need to force your opponent to trade into this by giving it taunt, maybe buffing it up a little bit, forcing them to deal with a bigger minion. As it is, it's just a 5 mana 2/2, and the opponent can basically just ignore that unless you manage to make it a little scarier for them to trade into. Even when you do buff it, it gets very weak to silence. And matter of fact, this is really weak to silence even on its own. I think priests are going to be running quite a few silences this expansion, so you really never want to play this against priest. Maybe you don't want to play it against like hunter or something like that, who may even start running owls again. In Arena, this is a much better card. It's a meteor prevention, board clear prevention card, forcing your opponent to kind of trade suboptimally in order to get rid of that 8/8 when they need to. Other than that, it's a little too understated for a 4-drop or for a 5-drop, but it does force your opponent to think about trades and board clears. So anything that can do that, anything that can kind of force your opponent not to just go face, not to do simple trades, is good in my book. Spectral Pillager. Combo. Deal damage equal to the number of other cards you played this turn. It's a rogue card. I feel this card is worse for minion removal than Assassinate or Vilespine Slayer. Those cards were 5 mana. Vilespine was a 5 mana that removed on a combo. Assassinate is just a simple kill the enemy minion. Benefit to this is it deals damage to face. You'll play this with coins, preps, eviscerates, a lot of small cost cards, and deal a big amount of damage to face. The problem is, this is decidedly a worse card as a 6-drop than Gadgets and Auctioneer, especially in Rogue, who kind of wants to get that card draw off of Auctioneer. So unless you're playing like a super aggressive Rogue that just wants to go face with direct damage, I really don't see any reason why you'd be playing this card. Matter of fact, Auctioneer is running Miracle Rogue, which wants to do that anyway, and I really don't see any reason to run this over Auctioneer. In Arena, this card is okay, not great. You really want this card to combo on at least 3 other cards. Otherwise, it's just a 6-cost SI7 agent. I don't know. I just think this card is a little too weak statted, a little too expensive to be played. Maybe if it were like a 5-drop or a 4-drop with smaller stats, I think this would be seen a lot more. Spellweaver. 6 mana, 4/4, spell damage +2. Really weak for a 6-drop. And the thing with spell damage is you really want like a spell damage minion to be low in cost, so you can play that minion and a bunch of spells on the same turn. And we really never even saw low-cost spell damage minions played. We saw like Malagos being played in like certain kind of rogue decks or priest decks that wanted to do like a sudden burst of damage and kind of cheat Malagos out before turn 9. But really the only spell damage card we ever saw consistently played was Blood Mage Thalnos, which got card draw as well as spell damage. And the fact that this card is such high cost, and the fact that it's low statted, and the fact that it's spell damage, I don't think this card is even ever going to be seeing play. In Arena, this card is terrible. It's so low statted for a 6-drop, you hardly ever see spells in Arena. And when you do, they're a little higher cost spells, especially if you're mage, they're higher cost spells. And you're not able to play Spellweaver and those spells on the same turn. So I think this card is not great at all. Speaking of spell damage, Tainted Zealot. We just looked at Spellweaver as a 6-mana card. Tainted Zealot is so much better than that. The fact that it has Divine Shield helps it to survive a little longer, forces your opponent to put a little more resources into removing this card. They can't just ping it. They can't just trade a 1-drop into it. They have to put more resources into removing this card. I think this card may be used in like a spell damage rogue, but I don't know. Spell damage +1 might not be enough for spell damage rogue or spell damage decks to even consider using this. So as it stands, it's a 2-mana 1/1 with Divine Shield, which is a worse Argent Squire. This card will never be used in Arena. You hardly ever get value out of spell damage, maybe in Mage if you've already drafted a bunch of spells. But other than that, it's a 2-cost Argent Squire, like I just said. Alright, the Lich King. Legendary minion, taunt at the end of your turn, add a random Death Knight card to your hand. What are the Death Knights? These are the Death Knight cards. They're not the Death Knight heroes. Death Knight cards are a bunch of really, really good cards that have low mana cost with a high value effect. Some of the effects require a little bit of risk reward to consider, but most of the time these are just really, really solid cards and really good cards to be using. We looked at Arthas in the last video, which gave you 1 Death Knight card on a Death Rattle. The Lich King is decidedly so much better than that. It's an end-of-turn effect, means it goes every single turn. This is on board. You keep getting these cards. You keep getting powerful effects. Priests used to run Ysera. Some priests still run it. I think we'll see this card in super greedy controlling decks. Maybe even put into other decks as well. I think this is a great card. It's a really good card in Arena, really good card in Constructed. Solid stats, solid ability with the taunt. Big target for your opponent to have to deal with. So, I think this is a really good card. Speaking of really good cards, we have Toxic Arrow. Hunter removal card deals 2 damage to a minion. If it survives, give it poisonous. So you can kill off your opponent's early game minions. If you have a minion that's higher than 2 health, so 3 or more health, you can target this and kill off any enemy minion you need to. This is a really solid card in Constructed, really good card in Arena, and a really solid all-around card, helping Hunter deal with an opponent's board. I think this card is great. It doesn't deal damage to face, which is kind of a downside, but the fact that it's a 2-mana removal basically should read 2 mana kill anything. I think this card is really good. The only downside to this is you need a board to get that poisonous effect off of it. You need a board with higher than 2 health. But I think that's doable. Really doable for hunters. Tuskar Fisherman. Battlecry. Give a friendly minion spell damage +1. Everything I just said about spell damage applies to this. This card needs another minion on board for the spell damage effect to take place. So, at least in Constructed, I think Tainted Zealot is much better than this card. In Arena, this card is really, really good. It's got solid stats for a 2-drop, and if you have a board, you get a little value out of its ability. So I think this is a solid Arena card. Not going to be used in Constructed, but we'll see it in Arena. Venomancer. 5-mana 2/5 with Poisonous. With Poisonous, attack value doesn't really matter since it kills anything it damages anyway. Got really, really good health for the card. It really trades well into other cards, trades well into like your enemy 4/6s, and gives you a chance to trade in again or force that opponent to ping it to get rid of it. In Constructed, I'm not sure we're going to see this just because it's not a super powerful effect unless we start seeing like super greedy cards that play a lot of or super greedy decks that play a lot of big bodies. Other than that, you're not going to see this card played all that much in Constructed. It gets silenced too easily. It gets easily removed too much in Constructed. In Arena, this is a really, really, really good card. Like I said, it trades with those 4/6s. Those cards you really don't want to waste like high value removal on, but you really need to get rid of them because they're too much of a threat. This helps deal with those cards. And it leaves 1 health left after trading into them for your opponent to deal with, like I just said. It's a common, and it gets set bonus, so we're really going to see this card quite a bit in Arena, and it's an annoying card for your opponent to have to play around. Vryghoul. If it's your opponent's turn, summon a 2/2 ghoul. The problem with this is it's not really too much of a threat for your opponent. If you play this on turn 3, it's just a 3/1 that they can really deal with by forcing you to trade into their minions. This is a super aggressive static card, but again, the Death Rattle only triggers on your opponent's turn. This card really needs Taunt or something else to help kind of force it into good territory, at least in Constructed. In Arena, this card is really, really, really good. It's got low health for a 3-drop. It's got that 1 health. But again, your opponent has to think about whether or not they want to ping it, whether or not they want to risk getting something else to deal with on board. It's another kind of annoying type Death Rattle that opponents are going to have to deal with in Arena. Again, you really want to place this next to a big drop when you're playing against mages to kind of force them to think about playing Meteor, to force them to think about clearing the board. Alright. Wicked Skeleton. Battlecry. Gain +1/+1 for each minion that died this turn. You really want to use this card in a Zooey type deck that really wants to trade into the opponent's board. To get really good value out of this, you want to trade at least 3 other minions. You want this card to be at least a 4/4 for this card to really get value out of it. The problem with this card is it's really, really weak to silence. If you play this card, your opponent is likely going to silence this card, and then you are left with a 4-mana 1/1. So in Constructed, I don't think this card is really going to see much play. In Arena, I think this card is much, much better. You tend to want to trade your minions a little more, and your board is constantly getting cleared and constantly, like, you're constantly clearing your own board to trade into other enemy minions. So this card, I think, is much, much, much better in Arena. It's a really solid Arena card, especially if you drafted more of like an aggro-y type deck. But even in like more of a mid-range or even like a slow deck, I think you're going to find a way to fit this in. Finally, we have Wretched Tiller. We get a continuing Leper Gnome effect. Leper Gnome did 2 damage to hero when it died. This constantly does it to face. Unless you're swinging on face, this card is really no good. You want to keep doing like 3 damage to face with this card. It's really too weak to see play. It's such a small body that I don't think you're going to see this run in Constructed. And in Arena, it just dies to pings. So in Arena, Leper Gnome is a decidedly much better card than this. Alright, so that's the final group of cards. I had a lot of fun reviewing or taking a look at every single card in this expansion. Like I said, it helped me kind of think a little more critically about cards, look at their pros and cons, and try to figure out exactly what I'm going to run. I'm going to have a lot of fun building all these new decks. Really looking forward to playing around with the Death Knight heroes. Really looking forward to playing around with like a Death Rattle type deck. I'm just really looking forward to this expansion. I hope you guys are too. Thank you very much for watching. You can like, you can comment, you can subscribe, you can do whatever you want. And thank you for watching.